The Innocent Victim, 2,500 words. On the lush, verdant homeworld of the Risharian species, a young child named Zellarn played innocently in the towering crystalline forests. The Risharians were a peaceful, technologically advanced race, their cities and settlements blending harmoniously with the natural wonder of their planet. Zellarn's family lived in a modest but comfortable dwelling on the outskirts of the capital city, far from the prying eyes of the rest of the galaxy. Zellarn loved to explore the forest, often disappearing for hours on end, communing with the sentient plant life and the graceful rainbow-hued avians that flitted between the towering transparent trees. The child's parents, Lara and Turan, would occasionally grow concerned, but they knew Zellarn possessed an innate understanding of the natural world that few Risharians could match. Their child's psionic gifts were a source of both pride and apprehension, for the Risharians had long ago learned to conceal the extent of their abilities from the rest of the galactic community. On this particular day, Zellarn had wandered deeper into the forest than usual, drawn by the faint whispers of an ancient, dormant crystal formation. The child's small, nimble fingers traced the intricate patterns etched into the glittering surface, their mind reaching out to commune with the dormant energies within. Zellarn's eyes widened as the crystal began to hum, its vibrant azure glow pulsing in time with the child's heartbeat. Suddenly, the tranquil forest was shattered by the thunderous roar of engines. Zellarn whirled around to see a sleek, angular craft descending through the canopy, its black hull gleaming ominously. Before the child could react, a beam of flickering energy lanced out, enveloping Zellarn in a sizzling field of containment. Crying out in terror, the child was lifted helplessly into the air, pulled towards the looming vessel. Lara and Turan, alerted by the commotion, rushed towards the disturbance, their hearts pounding with fear. But they were too late. By the time they reached the clearing, Zellarn had already been dragged into the alien craft, the child's terrified eyes the last thing they saw before the vessel's hatch slammed shut. Turan let out a guttural scream of anguish, while Lara collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Within the confines of the black ship, Zellarn trembled, the containment field sapping their strength. The child's mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of what was happening. Where were they being taken? Who were these strangers, and why had they taken Zellarn from their home? As the vessel rocketed away from the Risharian homeworld, Zellarn caught glimpses of the vast, star-studded expanse beyond the viewports. The child had never ventured this far from their planet before, and the sight of the endless cosmos filled them with a sense of dread and longing. Zellarn reached out with their psionic senses, trying to establish a mental connection with their captors, but the shielding on the craft was too strong. After what felt like an eternity, the vessel came to a halt, settling down on the surface of a desolate, rocky world. Zellarn was roughly dragged from the containment field and hustled down the ship's boarding ramp, their small feet stumbling on the unfamiliar terrain. The child was surrounded by a contingent of heavily armed humanoid figures, their faces obscured by reflective visors. "Move along, subject," one of the figures barked, shoving Zellarn forward with the barrel of their weapon. "The council is waiting." Zellarn's heart raced as they were marched through a towering, imposing structure that seemed to have been carved directly into the planet's surface. The child's senses were assaulted by the harsh, metallic scents and the eerie, echoing footsteps that reverberated through the cavernous, frayed nerves, but the oppressive atmosphere of the facility was proving difficult to overcome. Finally, the group of armed figures escorted Zellarn to a set of massive reinforced doors. With a hiss of hydraulics, the doors slid open, revealing a dimly lit chamber, its walls lined with arcane monitoring equipment and holographic displays. In the center of the room, a circular dais dominated the space, and seated upon it were a row of imposing, hooded figures. "Bring the subject forward," a deep, resonant voice commanded, and Zellarn was roughly shoved towards the dais. The child stumbled, but managed to maintain their footing, their large eyes darting between the shrouded figures. "So, this is the one," another voice murmured, a hint of curiosity threading through the dispassionate tone. The Risharian child with the exceptional psionic abilities. Zelharn's breath caught in their throat as the hooded figures leaned forward, their features still obscured by the deep shadows of their cowls. The child could sense the power and authority emanating from these strangers, and a deep, instinctive fear began to take root in their mind. The Risharians have managed to elude our notice for far too long, a third figure declared, their voice laced with disdain. But now, with this child in our possession, we can finally unlock the secrets of their psionic gifts. They will serve the Galactic Council well. Zelharn's eyes widened in horror as the implications of the stranger's words sank in. Serve the Galactic Council. What did that mean? The child's thoughts raced, desperately searching for some way to escape this nightmarish situation. But the overwhelming power of the hooded figures made any attempt at resistance seem futile. Begin the preliminary tests, the first voice commanded, and Zelharn was seized by a pair of the armed figures, who dragged the child towards a gleaming metal examination table. Zelharn struggled against their captors, but their strength was no match for the brutish guards. As they were strapped down, the child's cries of terror echoed through the chamber, falling on the deaf ears of the impassive Galactic Council members. The examination that followed was a nightmare of blinding lights, piercing probes, and agonizing sensations that Zelharn had never experienced before. The child's psionic abilities were pushed to their limits as the Council's scientists sought to quantify and measure the extent of their power. Zelharn's mind was assaulted by a barrage of invasive mental probes, leaving the child's psyche in turmoil. Through it all, Zelharn fought to maintain their composure, drawing upon the deep wellspring of their connection to the natural world. But the relentless torment eventually proved too much, and the child's consciousness slipped into a welcome, merciful darkness. When Zelharn finally awoke, they found themselves in a dimly lit cell, their body aching from the ordeal they had endured. The child's eyes were drawn to a small viewport, through which they could see the vast, starry expanse beyond. Zelharn reached out with their psionic senses, desperately seeking any connection to the familiar energies of their homeworld, but the oppressive shielding of the facility blocked their efforts. Curling up on the cold, hard floor of the cell, Zelharn let the tears flow freely, their heart aching with the knowledge that they had been torn from their family, their home, and everything they had ever known. The child's sobs echoed through the empty corridors, a heartbreaking plea for help that would fall on deaf ears, for now. The Galactic Council had their prize, and they had no intention of letting it go. Humanity's outrage, 2,500 words. News of Zelharn's abduction from the Risharian homeworld spread through the galactic community like wildfire, igniting a storm of outrage and condemnation. Holographic broadcasts and data streams carried the terrifying images and desperate pleas of the child's family, their cries for help echoing across the stars. On the bustling human colony world of New Horizon, the citizens gathered in the central plaza, their faces etched with shock and fury as they watched the disturbing footage. Lena Vasquez, a respected diplomat and veteran of the Unification Wars, stepped forward, her voice ringing with righteous indignation. The Galactic Council has once again demonstrated their callous disregard for the lives of innocent beings. She thundered, her fists clenched at her sides. This child, Zelharn, is but a pawn in their twisted games of power and domination. We cannot, and will not, stand idly by while they terrorize the galaxy. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of cheers and shouts, their anger palpable. Lena raised a hand, silencing them with a stern look. We must demand the immediate release of Zelharn and the withdrawal of the Council's forces from Risharian space. If our pleas fall on deaf ears, then we have no choice but to take action. Humanity will not be cowed by the Council's brutality. Across the human colonies, similar scenes played out as the news of Zelharn's abduction spread. On the bustling industrial hub of Olympus Prime, workers downed their tools and spilled out into the streets, their faces etched with fury. In the glittering towers of the new Catalam Arcology, Diplomats and politicians convened emergency sessions, their voices raised in outrage. "This is an affront to all civilized beings," thundered Counselor Mikhail Volkov, his weathered features twisted in disgust. "The Galactic Council has overstepped its bounds, and we must respond with the full force of our military might." Volkov's words were echoed across the human networks, rallying support for a unified response. Seasoned veterans, their bodies scarred by the Council's past transgressions, answered the call to arms without hesitation. Pilots, engineers, and soldiers from every corner of human-controlled space converged on strategic military installations, preparing for the looming conflict. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Galactic Council's stronghold, the news of the uproar rippled through the corridors of power. The hooded figures seated upon the dais observed the growing unrest with a mixture of disdain and concern. "The humans are predictably emotional," one of the council members remarked, their tone dripping with contempt. "They will submit to our will, as they have always done." Another figure leaned forward, their cowl casting deep shadows over their features. "The humans have proven themselves to be more troublesome than we anticipated. Perhaps it is time to demonstrate the true extent of our power." The council chambers erupted into a heated debate as the members argued over the appropriate course of action. Some advocated for a swift, decisive crackdown on the human colonies, while others counseled a more measured response, wary of provoking a wider conflict. Amidst the discord, a lone figure stood apart, their gaze fixed on the holographic displays that depicted the growing unrest across the galaxy. This was Executor Valkis, the Council's most trusted enforcer, a ruthless and calculating individual whose loyalty to the Council was absolute. "The human colonies have become a liability," Valkis declared, his voice cutting through the din. "They have grown too bold, too defiant. It is time to remind them of their place in the Galactic Order." The other council members fell silent, their attention drawn to Valkis' words. The executor's reputation for ruthless efficiency was well known, and his proposals were rarely questioned. "Assemble our finest forces," Valkis continued, his eyes glinting with a cold, calculating light. "We will crush this human uprising and reclaim the Risharian child. Let the galaxy tremble at the might of the Galactic Council." Within hours, the Council's military machine had been set in motion. Sleek, angular warships departed from fortified orbital dockyards, their hulls bristling with advanced weaponry. Elite shock troops, hardened by countless campaigns of subjugation, were deployed to strategic outposts and colonies, their orders to quell any signs of dissent. Back on New Horizon, the growing unrest had given rise to a burgeoning resistance movement. Lena Vasquez and her fellow activists had rallied the colonists, organizing covert networks of informants and dissidents who could provide early warning of the Council's actions. "They think they can intimidate us with a show of force," Lena declared, her eyes blazing with determination. "But they underestimate the resolve of the human spirit. We will not back down, not while our brothers and sisters suffer under the Council's tyranny." As the human colonies braced for the impending onslaught, a flurry of diplomatic activity unfolded across the galactic community. Ambassadors from the Risharian homeworld, their faces etched with grief and desperation, pleaded for assistance from the Council's member states. "Our child, Zelarn, has been taken from us," the Risharian envoy, Toran, stated, his voice wavering with emotion. "We beg of you, use your influence to demand the Council's immediate return of our beloved child." However, the response from the Council's allies was, at best, lukewarm. Many were reluctant to jeopardize their standing within the Galactic Order, fearful of the Council's retribution. Others, cowed by the Council's displays of power, refused to intervene, their eyes averted in shame. Torren's pleas fell on deaf ears, and he returned to his homeworld, his heart heavy with despair. It seemed that the Risharians would have to face the Council's wrath alone. Or so it seemed, until a glimmer of hope emerged from an unexpected source. Deep within the bustling spaceport of Olympus Prime, a small, unassuming freighter sat docked, its hull scarred by the rigors of countless hyperspace jumps. Aboard this vessel, a ragged crew of pilots, mechanics, and mercenaries had gathered, drawn together by a shared sense of outrage and a desire for revenge. Their leader was a grizzled veteran named Hank Donovan, a former Unification war pilot whose hatred for the Galactic Council ran deeper than most. When news of Zellarn's abduction had reached his ears, he had felt a spark ignite within his weathered soul. "Those bastards have gone too far this time," Donovan growled, his calloused hands clenching into fists. "We can't let them get away with this. Not again." Gathering his crew, Donovan set out to establish a covert network of informants and sympathizers, tapping into the growing resistance movement on the human colonies. As the Council's forces began to mobilize, the freighter's crew worked tirelessly, gathering intelligence and coordinating clandestine operations. Their efforts did not go unnoticed. Whispers of a mysterious, rogue element undermining the Council's operations began to circulate, sowing confusion and paranoia within the ranks of the enforcers. Back on the Risharian homeworld, Toran and Lyra clung to the faint glimmer of hope that their child might one day be returned to them. They spent their days in quiet contemplation, their minds reaching out through the vast expanse of the cosmos, searching for any sign of Zellarn's presence. And then, one fateful day, their prayers were answered. A coded message, transmitted from a seemingly innocuous source, found its way to their doorstep. Toran's hands trembled as he decoded the message, his eyes widening with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Zellarn is alive," he breathed, turning to his wife with tears in his eyes. "And there are those who seek to help us." The message went on to describe a daring plan, one that would require the Risharians to place their trust in the hands of a ragged band of human rebels. Toran and Lyra knew the risks were high, but the thought of their child suffering under the Council's cruel ministrations was a fate worse than death. Without hesitation, they made their decision. Toran composed a reply, his fingers flying across the console, and sent the message hurtling back into the void, praying that their newfound allies would receive it in time. As the human resistance and the Risharian homeworld forged an unlikely alliance, the Galactic Council's forces continued their inexorable march towards conflict. Valkis, the executor, oversaw the deployment of his elite shock troops, his cold gaze sweeping across the holographic displays that depicted the growing unrest. "The time for diplomacy has passed," Valkis declared, his voice laced with disdain. "Now we will show the galaxy the true power of the Galactic Council." The final pieces were falling into place, and a reckoning was on the horizon. Humanity's outrage had been kindled, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the galactic order. The gathering of forces, 2,500 words. Across the human colonies, the call to arms echoed like a thunderous drumbeat, rallying veterans and newcomers alike to the burgeoning resistance against the Galactic Council's tyranny. Seasoned pilots, their reflexes honed by years of combat, answered the summons without hesitation, eager to once again take to the stars and defend the ideals they had fought for during the Unification Wars. At the forefront of this mobilization stood Hank Donovan, the grizzled leader of the ragged crew that had been covertly undermining the Council's operations. Donovan had spent countless hours coordinating with the growing network of human resistance fighters, drawing on his vast experience and extensive contacts to organize the disparate factions into a cohesive fighting force. "We've got good people, good ships, and a whole lot of firepower," Donovan declared, his weathered face etched with determination as he addressed his assembled crew. "But we're gonna need more than that to take on the Council's elite. That's why we're reaching out to the Risharians and any other civilizations that have suffered under the Council's heel." The crew erupted into a chorus of cheers and affirmations, their resolve hardened by the injustice they had witnessed. Donovan raised a hand, silencing them with a wry smile. "Now I know some of you are worried about going up against the Council's might, but let me tell you something. We've got the element of surprise on our side. And we got something the Council will never have, the unbreakable spirit of the human race." Across the colonies, similar rallying cries echoed, as veteran soldiers and seasoned commanders stepped forward to lend their expertise to the burgeoning resistance. On the bustling industrial hub of Olympus Prime, technicians and engineers worked around the clock, retrofitting aging starships with the latest in cutting-edge weaponry and shielding technology. In the gleaming towers of New Callum, diplomats and political strategists coordinated with their counterparts on the Risharian homeworld, forging the foundations of a fragile alliance that would serve as the backbone of the impending conflict. The Risharians have agreed to provide us with intelligence and tactical support, Counselor Mikhail Volkov announced, his voice carrying a note of cautious optimism. Their psionic abilities will be an invaluable asset, and they have promised to mobilize what military forces they can spare. The announcement was met with a mixture of relief and trepidation. While the Risharians' involvement was a welcome development, the human colonies were acutely aware of the risks they were undertaking. The Galactic Council's retribution would be swift and merciless, and they would need every advantage they could muster to stand a chance of victory. As the preparations continued, Hank Donovan and his crew embarked on a series of daring raids and reconnaissance missions, gathering critical intelligence on the Council's military deployments and the location of Zelarn's captivity. With each successful operation, the Resistance's confidence grew, and the human colonies began to feel a glimmer of hope that they might actually be able to defeat the seemingly invincible Galactic Council. But even as the human-Risharian alliance took shape, cracks began to appear in the fragile unity of the Council's own ranks. The debate that had erupted in the Council chambers after Zelarn's abduction had only intensified, as the members argued bitterly over the appropriate course of action. Executor Valkis, the Council's ruthless enforcer, had pushed relentlessly for a swift and decisive military response, intent on crushing the human rebellion before it could gain further momentum. However, a growing faction within the Council, led by the more pragmatic and diplomatic members, sought a more measured approach, wary of provoking a wider conflict that could destabilize the entire galactic order. "The humans are a nuisance, to be sure," one of the dissenting council members argued, their voice laced with a hint of frustration. "But they are not our only concern. We must consider the broader implications of our actions and the potential for unintended consequences." Valkis responded with a barely concealed sneer, his icy gaze sweeping across the chamber. "The humans have grown too bold, too defiant. They must be made an example of, lest others be tempted to challenge our authority." The debate raged on, with both sides steadfastly refusing to back down. Valkis, sensing that the Council's unity was beginning to fray, redoubled his efforts, dispatching his most trusted agents to gather intelligence and root out any signs of dissent. Meanwhile, on the Risharian homeworld, Toran and Lara anxiously awaited the promised contact from Hank Donovan's resistance network. The coded message they had received had been vague, but the glimmer of hope it had ignited was enough to sustain them through their darkest moments. "Do you truly believe they can succeed?" Lara asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she clutched Toran's hand. Toran's eyes, once so vibrant and full of life, now held a deep, weary sadness. "I don't know, my love, but I cannot bear the thought of Zelarn suffering a moment longer under the Council's cruelty. If there is even the slightest chance of their rescue, we must take it." The days passed with agonizing slowness, and the Risharian couple found themselves torn between hope and despair. They knew that the Council's forces were mobilizing, and that the human resistance's window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Just as they were about to lose all hope, a sudden burst of static crackled to life on their communication console, and a familiar voice echoed through the room. "Toran, Lara, this is Hank Donovan. We're ready. The time has come to bring your child home." Toran and Lara exchanged a charged glance, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. They knew the risks were high, but the thought of Zelarn enduring further torment at the hands of the Council was unbearable. Without hesitation, they began to make the necessary preparations, summoning a small contingent of their most trusted allies to accompany them on the perilous journey. As they made their way to the designated rendezvous point, Toran and Lyra found themselves caught in the grip of a maelstrom of emotions: fear, hope, and a steely determination to be reunited with their beloved child, no matter the cost. Back in the heart of the Galactic Council's stronghold, the debate among the council members had reached a fever pitch. Valkis, his patience wearing thin, had finally resorted to threats and intimidation, forcing the more dissenting voices into reluctant compliance. "The time for discussion is over," the executor declared, his voice booming through the chamber. "We will crush this human rebellion and reclaim the Risharian child. No one will stand in our way." With Valkis' directive firmly in place, the Council's military machine began to move with renewed vigor. Legions of heavily armed shock troops were deployed to strategic locations across human-controlled space, their orders to quell any signs of resistance with ruthless efficiency. As the human colonies braced for the impending onslaught, Hank Donovan and his crew made their final preparations, their modified freighter loaded with the latest in weaponry and shielding technology. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, but the thought of abandoning Zellarn to the Council's cruelty was unthinkable. "This is it, people," Donovan announced, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his assembled crew. "We're about to take on the most powerful force in the galaxy, but I know each and every one of you is ready for this. We're going to show the Council that the human spirit cannot be broken." The crew erupted into a chorus of cheers, their determination fueling the engines of their modified freighter as it lifted off from the Olympus Prime spaceport, joining a growing fleet of human and Risharian vessels that had converged on the designated rendezvous point. In the void between the stars, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the galactic order. The human-Risharian alliance had gathered its forces, and they were ready to face the might of the Galactic Council, whatever the cost. The assault on the Council, 2,500 words. The void between the stars was alive with the thunderous roar of engines and the blazing trails of thruster exhaust as the human Risharian fleet surged towards the Galactic Council's fortified stronghold. At the heart of this formidable armada was Hank Donovan's modified freighter, its sleek, angular hull gleaming with the latest in shielding and weapons technology. Donovan stood at the ship's helm, his weathered features etched with a steely determination as he guided the vessel through the intricate web of enemy defenses. Beside him, the Risharian envoys, Toran and Lyra, gripped the armrests of their seats, their knuckles white with tension. "We're approaching the outer perimeter," Donovan announced, his voice calm and measured. "Get ready, people. This is where the fun begins." As the freighter closed in on the Council's citadel, a swarm of sleek, angular fighters burst forth from the fortified structures, their plasma cannons blazing. Donovan's crew immediately sprung into action, the veteran pilots unleashing a barrage of missiles and laser fire that tore through the enemy fighters' shields. "Keep them off our tail," Donovan barked, his hands dancing across the ship's controls. "We need to get to the inner landing bay, no matter what it takes." The human Risharian fleet followed closely behind, their ships unleashing a withering hail of fire that slowly carved a path through the Council's defenses. Zellarn's terrified face, projected on a holographic display, served as a constant reminder of the stakes at hand, fueling the resolve of the pilots and ground troops. As the freighter neared the inner landing bay, a towering force field sprang to life, blocking their path. Donovan's eyes narrowed, and he gripped the ship's controls with renewed determination. "Hold on tight," he growled. "This is going to get rough." With a burst of speed, the freighter plunged headlong towards the shimmering barrier, its powerful engines straining against the immense energy of the force field. Just as it seemed like the ship would be torn apart, the force field flickered and collapsed, allowing the freighter to careen into the landing bay. Donovan's crew wasted no time, leaping from the ship's airlock and storming the Council's inner sanctum, their weapons blazing. Toran and Lyra, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and hope, raced alongside the elite ground forces, their psionic abilities enhancing the team's combat prowess. The Council's security forces, caught off guard by the audacity of the assault, struggled to mount an effective defense. Donovan's team fought their way through the maze of corridors, their progress marked by the echoing cries of the wounded and the acrid scent of scorched metal. At the heart of the citadel, Executor Valkis watched the unfolding chaos with a mixture of fury and disgust. His cold, calculating gaze swept across the holographic displays, his mind racing as he formulated a response. "Seal off the inner chambers," Valkis barked, his voice cutting through the din. "Send in the heavy assault units. I want those intruders eliminated, no matter the cost." As the Council's reinforcements poured into the corridors, Donovan's team found themselves facing a relentless onslaught. The elite shock troopers, clad in gleaming armor and wielding devastating plasma weapons, pushed the human Risharian forces back, inch by agonizing inch. Toran and Lyra, their psionic abilities taxed to the limit, fought alongside the ground troops, their minds lashing out at the enemy, disrupting their coordination and sowing confusion in their ranks. But the sheer numbers and firepower of the Council's forces threatened to overwhelm them. Just as it seemed like all hope was lost, a deafening explosion rocked the citadel, and a familiar voice crackled over the comm channel. "Hank, we're here. Hold on. We're coming in hot." Donovan's eyes widened as he recognized the voice of his longtime friend and ally, a seasoned pilot who had answered the call to arms. A swarm of sleek, agile fighters descended upon the Council's forces, raining down a torrent of missiles and laser fire that tore through their defenses. "About damn time, Jansen," Donovan yelled, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's show these Council bastards what we're made of." Reinvigorated by the arrival of the additional support, the human Risharian forces redoubled their efforts, pushing deeper into the Citadel's labyrinthine corridors. Toran and Lyra, their psionic energies surging, guided the ground troops towards the chamber where they believed Zellarn was being held. As they approached the heavily fortified door, a sudden blast of energy sent them reeling. Valkis, his robes billowing, strode into the corridor, his hand outstretched as he unleashed a devastating psionic assault. "You fools," the Executor hissed, his voice dripping with contempt. "Did you truly believe you could challenge the might of the Galactic Council?" Toran and Lyra, their bodies racked with pain, struggled to their feet, their minds reaching out to shield their comrades from Valkis' onslaught. The ground troops, their weapons blazing, tried in vain to break through the Executor's formidable defenses, but his psionic prowess was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Donovan, his heart pounding with a mix of fury and desperation, raced towards the chamber, determined to reach Zellarn before it was too late. He could hear the child's muffled cries echoing through the door, a sound that drove him forward with renewed vigor. As Donovan reached the door, he found it locked, its mechanisms sealed by a complex array of security protocols. Gritting his teeth, he began to work, his fingers flying across the control panel as he attempted to bypass the defenses. Meanwhile, the battle raged on in the corridor, with Toran and Lyra desperately trying to hold Valkis at bay. The Executor's psionic assault was relentless, his power seemingly limitless as he toyed with the Risharians and their human allies. "You are nothing," Valkis spat, his eyes glinting with malicious triumph. "Your pathetic resistance will be crushed, and the Risharian child will be ours to command." Toran, his body battered and his mind wavering, summoned the last of his strength, his psionic energies lashing out with a fury born of desperation. "You will not take our child," he cried, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We will never surrender to your cruelty." Valkis, momentarily caught off guard by the intensity of Toran's attack, staggered backwards, his focus broken. In that instant, Donovan's triumphant shout rang out. "I've got it. Zellarn, hold on, we're coming." The door hissed open, and Donovan rushed inside, his blaster raised and ready. But what he saw within the chamber made his blood run cold. Zellarn, the Risharian child, lay strapped to an examination table, their small body covered in bruises and lacerations. Tubes and wires snaked from their limbs, feeding into a network of arcane monitoring devices. The child's eyes, once filled with vibrant life, were now dull and haunted, their spirit nearly broken by the Council's cruel ministrations. Donovan's heart ached with a fury he had never known, and he turned, his weapon blazing, ready to cut down anyone who dared to stand in his way. But as he emerged from the chamber, he found Valkis and the Council's forces in disarray, the Risharian parents and their human allies pressing their advantage with renewed vigor. In a desperate gambit, Valkis unleashed a final, devastating psionic attack, his mind lashing out with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the Citadel. Toran and Lyra, their bodies battered and their psionic reserves depleted, faltered under the onslaught, their cries of pain echoing through the corridors. Donovan, his eyes burning with tears of rage and anguish, rushed to the Risharians' aid, his weapon blazing as he tried to shield them from Valkis' merciless assault. But the Executor's power was unrelenting, and the human Risharian forces found themselves pushed back, inch by agonizing inch. Just as it seemed like all was lost, a deafening rumble shook the Citadel, and the very structure began to tremble and sway. Valkis, his concentration broken, turned his gaze towards the ceiling, his eyes widening in horror. Impossible, he breathed as a massive, hulking shape descended through the smoke and dust, its weapons primed and ready. The Risharian homeworld's most powerful warship had arrived, its massive cannons unleashing a devastating barrage that tore through the Council's defenses. Donovan and his team, seizing the opportunity, surged forward, their weapons blazing as they fought to reach Zellarn's location. In the chaos, Toran and Lyra, their psionic energies renewed, lashed out at Valkis, their combined might overwhelming the Executor's defenses. The once fearsome enforcer, his arrogance shattered, fled in a desperate attempt to escape the crumbling citadel. Donovan, his heart pounding with triumph, rushed into the chamber, Zellarn's battered form cradled in his arms. The child, their eyes barely open, mustered a weak smile, their psionic connection with the human reaching out in a silent plea for help. As the human Risharian forces fought to secure the citadel and evacuate the wounded, the mighty warship from the Risharian homeworld continued its bombardment, its powerful beams of energy tearing through the Council's remaining defenses. In the end, the assault on the Galactic Council's stronghold had been a resounding success, but the cost had been high. Donovan and his team, their ranks thinned by the fierce fighting, gathered Zellarn and the Risharian parents, their eyes bright with relief and pride. The battle might have been won, but the war was far from over. As the human Risharian forces made their escape, they knew that the Galactic Council would not take this defeat lightly. The reckoning was still to come, and they would need to be prepared for whatever the future. Humanity's triumph, 2,500 words. As the battered but victorious human Risharian fleet made its escape from the Galactic Council's crumbling citadel, a palpable sense of relief and triumph filled the air. Zellarn, the once captive Risharian child, was cradled in the arms of their anxious parents, Toran and Lyra, their faces etched with a mixture of joy and sorrow. Hank Donovan, his weathered features set in a determined scowl, oversaw the evacuation of the wounded and the final preparations for their departure. The veteran pilot knew that the Council's retribution would be swift and merciless, and they needed to put as much distance between themselves and the shattered stronghold as possible. "Let's get the hell out of here," Donovan growled, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crew. "We've got our work cut out for us." As the fleet's ships powered up their engines and prepared to make the jump to hyperspace, a sudden transmission crackled to life on the communication channels. The image of a haggard-looking Executor Valkis appeared, his cold eyes burning with a fury that sent a chill down the spines of the human and Risharian forces. "You fools," Valkis spat, his voice laced with venom. "You think you can defy the might of the Galactic Council and escape unscathed. Your pathetic rebellion will be crushed, and the Risharian child will be ours once more." Toran, his protective instincts roaring to life, stepped forward, his psionic energies flaring in a defiant display. "We will never surrender Zellarn to your cruelty, Executor," the Risharian father declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "The Galactic Council's reign of terror is at an end. Humanity and its allies will not rest until your corrupt system is dismantled and justice is served." Valky's lips curled into a menacing sneer, and he opened his mouth to deliver a scathing retort. But before he could utter a single word, the transmission was abruptly cut off, the image dissolving into a haze of static. "That's our cue to get the hell out of here," Donovan announced, his hands already dancing across the ship's controls. "Hold on to your seats, people. This is gonna be one hell of a ride." The human Risharian fleet surged forward, its ships disappearing into the inky blackness of space as they made the perilous jump to hyperspace. Behind them, the Galactic Council's shattered citadel drifted, its once imposing structure reduced to a smoldering ruin. As the fleet navigated the treacherous currents of hyperspace, Toran and Lara tended to the battered but resilient Zellarn, their psionic energies flowing through the child's body, soothing their wounds and replenishing their depleted strength. "We're so proud of you, my child," Lara whispered, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. "You've been so brave, and you've endured so much. But now, you're safe. We'll never let anyone hurt you again." Zellarn, their large eyes shining with a renewed spark of life, reached out and grasped their parents' hands, a silent gesture of gratitude and love. The family's reunion, long awaited and hard won, was a testament to the power of the human Risharian alliance and the indomitable spirit of the Risharian people. Aboard Hank Donovan's freighter, the veteran pilot and his crew huddled around a makeshift strategy table, their brows furrowed in deep contemplation. They knew that the Galactic Council would not rest until they had reclaimed Zellarn and crushed the human-led rebellion. "We've dealt them a heavy blow, but it's not going to be enough," Donovan mused, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his crew. "The Council's got more resources, more manpower, and more firepower than we could ever hope to match. We need to think bigger, bolder, if we're going to have a chance at winning this thing." The others nodded in agreement, their minds racing with ideas and strategies. They knew that the stakes were higher than ever, and the fate of the entire galactic community hung in the balance. As the fleet made its way towards the Risharian homeworld, the news of their stunning victory against the Galactic Council's forces spread like wildfire through the far-flung human colonies and beyond. Cheers and celebrations erupted in the streets as the people of the Milky Way dared to hope that a new era of freedom and justice might be on the horizon. But the Council's retribution was not long in coming. Within days, the human worlds were besieged by a relentless onslaught of the Council's elite shock troops and heavily armed warships. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, their populations terrorized and subjugated by the invading forces. Hank Donovan and his crew, their modified freighter leading the charge, fought tirelessly to defend the beleaguered human colonies, their weapons blazing as they bought precious time for the civilians to evacuate. But the Council's might was overwhelming, and the human Risharian alliance found itself pushed back, inch by agonizing inch. As the situation grew more dire, Toran and Lara, their eyes burning with a fierce determination, stepped forward, their psionic abilities augmenting the efforts of the human resistance. Together, they forged a coordinated strategy, utilizing the Risharian homeworld's advanced technology and the human colony's resourcefulness to mount a desperate counteroffensive. From the shadows, the mysterious network of human and alien dissidents that Donovan had cultivated over the years emerged, their covert operations sowing chaos and confusion within the Council's ranks. Supply lines were disrupted, communication networks were jammed, and the very foundations of the Council's power began to crumble. Valkys, his arrogance shattered by the earlier defeat, grew increasingly unhinged, his relentless pursuit of the Risharian child and the human rebels driving him to commit ever more brutal atrocities. But the more he tightened his grip, the more the galactic community rallied against him and the Council's tyrannical rule. In the end, it was the Risharians' psionic abilities, combined with the human colony's ingenuity and resourcefulness, that turned the tide of the conflict. Zelharn, their powers fully restored, became a beacon of hope, their psionic energies empowering the human Risharian forces and sowing discord within the Council's ranks. As the war raged on, the Human Risharian Alliance forged new partnerships with other oppressed civilizations, their shared experiences and collective determination fueling a growing movement for galactic reform. Slowly but surely, the Council's grip on power began to slip, as more and more worlds pledged their support to the burgeoning rebellion. In the final climactic battle, the Human Risharian forces, bolstered by their newfound allies, launched a daring assault on the Council's remaining strongholds. Donovan and his crew, their skills honed by countless engagements, led the charge, their modified freighter cutting a swath through the enemy's defenses. Zelharn, their psionic abilities now at their peak, stood at the forefront of the assault, their mind reaching out to disrupt the Council's forces and empower their allies. Toran and Lyra, their hearts swelling with pride and determination, fought alongside their child, their combined might overwhelming the Council's last line of defense. As the battle raged, Valkis, his sanity crumbling, made a desperate last stand, his psionic powers lashing out with a fury that shook the very foundations of the galactic order. But in the end, his arrogance and cruelty proved to be his undoing, as the combined forces of the Human Risharian Alliance crushed his defenses and brought the Executor crashing down. In the aftermath of the victory, the Galactic Council's leadership lay in ruins, their once formidable empire reduced to a shadow of its former self. Zelharn, their face radiant with joy, embraced their parents, their psionic energies intertwining in a celebration of freedom and renewal. Hank Donovan, his weathered features etched with a sense of pride and accomplishment, stood beside the reunited Risharian family, his gaze sweeping across the gathered human and alien forces. They had fought against impossible odds and emerged victorious, their triumph a testament to the power of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of the human race. As the dust settled and the galactic community began the arduous process of rebuilding, Toran and Lyra, with Zelharn at their side, stepped forward to begin the process of reshaping the galactic order. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they were determined to ensure that no child would ever again suffer the fate that had befallen their beloved Zelharn. Hank Donovan and his crew, their roles as heroes and liberators now firmly cemented in the annals of history, took their leave, their sights set on new challenges and adventures. But they knew that their bond with the Risharian family and the Human Risharian Alliance they had forged would endure, a shining example of the power of unity and the indomitable spirit of the galaxy's oppressed. As the Human Risharian forces dispersed, the galactic community began to glimpse the first glimmers of a new era, one marked by hope, cooperation, and a shared commitment to justice and freedom. The Galactic Council's reign of terror had been brought to an end, and a new dawn was on the horizon.